Boys, we are back for another potty, and Scotty is back to join us. How was your little time away, mate?
It was good, bro. The weather in Queensland was amazing. To be fair, I think I might have brought some of it back because the weather in Melbourne today is very good as well. But you just can't beat it up there, man. As you know, I like to get up to the Gold Coast as much as I can during winter just because it helps break up, the winter here. And it's just so good up there. Like even just training 5:30 in the morning there, the amount of people that you see, the gyms are packed, everyone's up early, coffee shops are open early. It's definitely my scene. It's very busy very early, and equally it's very sleepy, from like 6 o'clock onwards. Everyone rises early and they go to sleep early, which suits me to the letter. But it was really good, man. It's nice to get up there, bit of work and a bit of family time, and we managed to lock down some NBA business while up there as well, which was very exciting. So no, it was a good week. It was a really good week.
Where did you train while you're up there?
So I train at Club Lime. So our apartment is at Peppers. So I literally just go straight downstairs, cross the road into the Oasis. Do you know the Oasis Centre there?
Yep.
Yeah. So the Club Lime is there, I think, on level 3, and it used to be really, really average in terms of the kit. It was very old and outdated because it was a rebrand. Club Lime took it over from, I forget the name of what it was. It was something My Fitness Broadbeach or something like that. And they've just done a massive refurb in the last, basically since I've been in London. And so they had everything brand new, a lot of Gym 80. They had a really nice pendulum, really, really good kit. And so I literally just walked straight across the road and I'm there. So it was good, man. Really, really, really good. And equally, a lot of lifters that train there. And it's amazing, some of the people that you run into who, I'm pretty under the radar when I train. I like to get in, get out, but people who just say hi, who either know you through NBA or competing, or the potty, which was cool. But it was a good week, man.
That's awesome. I was actually up there too, but we didn't get a chance to say hello to each other because...
No, you're up there. You were in and out very quick.
Yeah, I went up on Saturday, flew into Brizzy, then drove down with Stu to the Gold Coast to see the ICN All-Female Classic show that I had a client in. And that was really good. Those guys, especially Jason and Jay, the head judge, they really bounce well off each other when they MC. So they make it run so smooth. So it was really good. And it was just good to start to get back around comps because, we've had a bit of a break. But yeah, it was definitely good to be there. As soon as I got to the airport, hoodie came off straight away. I was like, oh my God, it's so beautiful here. It's so nice. Mm-hmm. And then the next day in Brizzy at World Gym Stafford, we had a workshop with Donna, an NBA workshop with Donna. So she pretty much came from her Bali getaway trip and straight back to Brizzy and into a workshop. And that was really good to meet a hell of a lot of amazing athletes, people that listen to the potty too. So it was really, really good to meet a whole bunch of people and makes me really, really excited. There was some amazing athletes. So, and also a lot of inspiring ones too. Some people that had like really amazing stories of the transformations they've had. So it was good. And then I was back home and straight back into the cold weather. So
yeah,
it was good to be up there for a little bit. But MG, how was your weekend? Was it nice and quiet, or were you pretty busy?
No, man, I was a bit cooked on the weekend, man. Unfortunately, it's been very, very quiet. I've just been stuck in the cold and just doing some little odd jobs and stuff around the new house and dad life, man, which is just the best thing.
That's awesome. How's the knee? What's the update there?
Yeah, so I've unfortunately done a little bit of damage to the meniscus again. So likely that there'll be an arthroscope in the future, but I'm just kind of putting it off for now. As you guys know, lots of weekends and weeks away with travel coming up for us, so I can survive for the time being. A few things that I'm unable to do, but I just don't have the time at the moment to go in and get it sorted. So I'll put it on the back burner until the end of the season and maybe finish work in December when I normally work right up to, say, the Christmas Eve week. Maybe I'll knock off 2 weeks early, have the op then, and then start my holidays a little bit sooner. I think it just makes more sense. But for me, it's just one thing to the next, man.
Is there any discomfort or pain or swelling still? Or?
Yeah. So I can't rotate under any sort of load at all. Like, and I'm talking like if I turn sharply, just as a body weight turn, and I do it too quickly, I get that big pop every time, and then the swelling just goes up instantly. So I'm managing it with a brace, lots of icing, And as long as I'm walking straight and not doing anything silly, I tend to get away with it for the most part, but I just got to be super careful.
I was going to say that you got like a brace or a strapping on it, or
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But you know, it's definitely an injury that I've been through so many times. I'm used to it, and I think know what to do in terms of managing it. It's funny because I get to the end of the day, let's say a day like today where I'll do say 4 or 5 sessions in the morning, come home for a little bit, go work at night. By the end of the day, it's blown up to like the size of a beach ball. So if I can manage the inflammation, I tend to be able to manage the pain. So that's the methodology at the moment. There's some rehab stuff we're going to do as well, but ultimately with a meniscus, and I've already had the 3 ACLs and an arthroscope already, so there's not a lot of it left. So I think there's probably a replacement in my near future. I just don't think with the level of meniscus that's left that I'll be able to sustain it forever. But it is what it is, man.
Well, Scotty and I have you covered. We'll give you piggybacks anywhere you need. when
Appreciate it. I wouldn't mind some Morrell meniscus if that's possible.
He's probably got plenty of it.
Yeah.
Let's get into some questions. We've got a fair few in no particular order. I'm just going to run through them and we'll deep dive if we need to. All right, let's start with this one. What is the reason that I couldn't get a good pump backstage? Was I too cold, not enough carbs? And should bikini ladies pump up glutes or just their delts and upper body? So let's separate it for what you should pump and what you shouldn't pump. But Scotty, is there a reason why someone couldn't get a good pump?
Yeah, there's lots of reasons. So it could be, the temperature. If it was really, really cold, that can make it hard to promote blood flow. But you said it was a bikini competitor?
Yeah, well, they asked a question about bikini, so I'm assuming it is a competitor.
Okay, yeah, cool. It could also be if you were super, super flat. So if you were sucking down low, running low carbohydrate leading into it. Granted, there's not really a massive benefit. And this is something I've never really understood. If you're not like a top line IFBB bikini competitor, why you would be, depleting and then repleting. Because from a conditioning perspective, you're probably not going to notice a difference, with the exception of maybe if you're onboarding a lot of carbohydrate, leading into the day before a show, you just might feel a little bit watery potentially. So for me, I would probably, again, I don't typically prep a lot of bikini athletes, but when I have, I would usually run them a little bit lower. You want to keep the amount of food going through gastric motility quite low. And in terms of the not getting a pump, it could be a sodium issue. So if this person perhaps has drunk a lot of water, or if they haven't had a lot of water, if they're dehydrated, that can affect, your vascular system. But usually it's a combination of an electrolyte imbalance. So perhaps you just didn't have enough sodium, and obviously sodium can help with that blood pressure. So increasing blood pressure. Equally, if they've had some I've had a complete mind blank. Citrulline malate. I need to have some caffeine, some citrulline malate potentially. But again, I think for the most part, it just comes down to the level of conditioning. Because if you're someone that's not really conditioned enough from a physiological perspective, manipulating those variables like adding in more sodium, pushing in citrulline malate and things of that nature, you're not really going to see a big difference other than perhaps your perception of how you feel that pump to be.
So I know people understand about, pushing in some sodium, pushing in some carbohydrate. You covered about water. How important is that on show day or even leading up to the show? Should you be having a lot of water? Should it just be enough for thirst, or what should you really be doing? And does that affect the pump per se?
Yeah, it does. So I don't think you should be doing anything outside of what you would ordinarily be doing. Like ideally, you just want to be hydrated. So you don't want to be hyperhydrated, and you definitely don't want to be dehydrated. But you typically want to just have your usual amount of water that you would have. Let's say that you're on at midday. You might have the usual amount of water you would have from when you wake till say like maybe 9:30, 10 a.m. And then you'll usually just shut off water to sip it as you need it. More so from the perspective that if you're continuing to drink water, you could be potentially diluting, plasma osmolality, so the concentration of your blood sodium. But more so, you got to go to the bathroom all the time to pee, which can be annoying, and you feel like you might have a little bit of distension through the stomach. So you just want to feel for those last, ideally, hour, 90 minutes out that you don't need to go to the bathroom. You should feel on the verge of almost maybe a tiny little bit thirsty. And then typically, if you've nailed your peak as you're on stage, you'll find that you're starting to get a little bit thirstier, and that would usually be an indication that blood sodium concentration is higher. But again, these things I wouldn't really think are necessary for a bikini athlete, because again, the conditioning requirement isn't of a sports, a fitness, or a figure. And equally, those manipulations and those little 1%ers and elements of minutia are not going to have that same, carry over to an improved aesthetic look, so to speak, at that given body composition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes complete sense. So MG, what would you look at? Pumping, not pumping, depending on their strengths and weaknesses?
For sure. Yeah, so I suppose it's, again, you're going to look at each athlete individually. I've got, competitors who step on stage who may be already dominant in the glutes, that maybe don't need as much blood in their glutes as they do their shoulders to match. So you're going to have a little bit of a plan with your coach prior to what you're going to focus on pumping. But like, if I'm going to give a very generalized response, for the most part, you want to put some blood in the glutes, nothing too taxing. I certainly don't have anyone, squatting or doing anything like that backstage. I'll typically use like a banded kickback, or even a partner resisted kickback, something like that. And again, depending on the federation, will depend on what you're going to pump from the waist up. So, if there's something like an NBA, for example, where if you've got your hair down and you're covering the middle of your back, maybe you're going to put more of your focus into your sort of medial and rear delt heads, as well as the anterior delt head, but not so much in your sort of lower to mid traps. Again, if it's something like an ICN, you're going to do your whole back as well. So,
yeah, makes complete sense.
But you want to base it on the look, right? You want to have a look at you want to have you and your coach have a look at your physique and see which areas are already standing out and maybe don't need as much attention. And you might try and put a little bit more effort and attention into areas that are maybe a little bit lagging. If you're very well balanced, you're going to hit the areas that I've just mentioned.
Yeah, perfect. Actually, while we're on this, Scotty, maybe we want to go into about pumping the legs, pumping the quads, and why we would or wouldn't. And you can talk about from a bodybuilding classic, you can talk about for men's feet, just in general, what would you do with the quads, with the legs?
Yeah, so we're talking about males now, not females, or both?
Yeah, you can talk about males, yeah.
Well, if you're talking about males, and I would say even female fitness, figure, potentially even sports to that degree, I'm not a big advocate of putting large amounts of blood flow to the lower extremities, because typically you'll find that most people, it'll start to mask their detail. Like if you think about when you're in prep and you have a crazy quad pump, you don't see all of those cuts and those lines. Maybe 20 minutes afterwards, you start to see all that vascularity appear, but equally, you're still going to lose a lot of the detail that you see. And so what happens, obviously, when you're in that peak week protocol intervention, you're usually trying to reduce stress so you can let a lot of that potential inflammation and edema clear your body so that you're able to show as much refinement as you can. And so on show day, it doesn't make it, an abundance of sense to put a huge amount of blood in that area. And another one is the triceps, for example. If you put too much blood in the triceps, you can sometimes lose the striations in that lateral head of the tricep as a result of, the specific movement that you do. So it's a fine line, but typically you'd stay away from your quads because you want them to be razor sharp. You want to show off all of that feathering. And equally, if you've pumped up properly through the rest of your body, you've got good carbohydrate on board, you've had sodium, and obviously you're in a really good level of body conditioning. When you get underneath the lights and you flex your legs, you're going to show off that detail. You don't need to put blood in it. Versus an area like chest, shoulders, tries, you can afford to obviously put a lot more blood in an area. And equally, you need to bring that up, because if you think about relative to certain size, your quads are a lot bigger than what your biceps and what your shoulders are going to be, or at least you'd hope they would be. So yeah, you're typically going to want to steer clear from that. And the glutes is a bit of an exception. Again, you want to put enough in there, but if you've got someone like a classic guy or a bodybuilder that's their glutes are all the way inside out, you also would want to be mindful of that. You might have a little bit of blood in there that helps, push against the skin if there's not much body composition there, but you don't want to put too much to the point where you get large amounts of blood, potentially some fluid that, hovers around that area, and you mask/lose some of the detail.
Yeah. And I guess you don't want to completely stay away from even trying to flex them, because obviously you want to wake them up. You want to know how to activate your muscles. So you're probably going through some posing before you go on stage. So don't, say, well, Scotty said don't flex anything, so I'm not going to do it until I get on stage. You can definitely still practice posing and, do your side chest and your side tricep and flex all your muscles before you go on stage. We're just talking about like really pumping them up and and giving them hell. So just make sure you be mindful of that.
And your pump should be like, your protocol should be that you want to get to the point where, and this is where if you've nailed your peaking intervention right, once you've got a pump, it shouldn't leave you straight away, because if there's enough carbohydrate on board and you've got your fluid and your electrolyte levels where they need to be, once it's there, it's going to be hanging around. If you add in, like I said, some citrulline into that mix, you're going to notice that it's going to be there and it will linger. And then you shouldn't need to do an abundance of continuing to pump up. You should be able to pose and flex and hold and rest. And then the physique will continue to improve and improve and improve without you actually having to physically contract by using a dumbbell or doing heaps of push-ups. Like, you should be steering away from that, because you're also accumulating fatigue with that, versus posing. It's more specific. When you're on stage, you're not doing bicep curls, you're hitting your quarter turns. So there should be part A, which is to get the blood into the muscle where you need it to go. And then it's about displaying the physique, holding that. And again, if your pump is good and your intervention leading into that has been, on the money, then your pump isn't going to run away.
Yeah. And normally we would ask the client while they're pumping up, or when they finish, like, do you still feel pumped? Do you still feel full? Have you lost the pump? So we can understand whether we need to make an adjustment or a change at that time.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move on. Why is the head judge also the MC in so many federations? Seems to affect the timing and the flow of the show. If separating MC and head judge and dividing responsibilities seems like a better option. Maybe you want to chat a little bit more about this, MG.
Yeah, well, it's definitely something that we picked up after last season. And, depending on the available resources at the time, if you use us as an example, before we came on board, Stewie was obviously trying to do as much as he possibly could, and he did a freaking amazing job at it too. And, we came on board and we're like, how is he able to do all these things as one person? But, what we identified is, in terms of trying to make things run smoother, is if we do divide and conquer some of those duties, that maybe things will run smoother. And I think what you're going to see this season, just being specific to NBA, is, you'll see me up there a little bit more and removing some of that from him, so that things do run a bit smoother. I think, to answer the question, it's because, for the most part, the head judge is so involved and has a best understanding of how the day is to run and operate, that it just makes sense for them to have some involvement on the mic. Should it be all the involvement on the mic? Probably not. But again, businesses and federations are set up the way that they're set up, and a lot of things are done because that's just how they've always been done. We have the ability to look at it from a different angle and say, hey, can we make this more efficient, better for viewing? Can we streamline it and make it smoother? And we've decided to do that. So I suppose the person who's asked this question is, pretty spot on the money from what we thought was worth a change. And we'll see whether, it does turn out to be a good move as this season progresses. But I think, for the most part, the head judge is emceeing because, one, you want somebody making the right calls in terms of quarter turns or comparisons, and it should be the head judge's decision to move athletes next to each other. I think one of the things that I've had my athletes confused about is, when the MC is calling out the comparisons and the head judge is the one who really should be making those comparisons, yet it's the president or the promoter who's like, actually, you go next to that person. Well, is that what the head judge wanted, or is that what you wanted? So there definitely needs to be the head judge involvement on the mic as an MC when it comes to call out comparisons and turns. Do they need to do everything in terms of the presentation of the show, the interviews, the introductions? Probably not. The balance is somewhere in the middle. Hopefully we find it spot on this year.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really, really good point. I think there needs to be like a handover.
Yeah.
So when they're on stage and getting judged, the judge is doing all the direction and all the talking. And then when it's finished and they're doing presentations or things like that, or a pose down, then the MC can take back over. I think if the MC tries to get involved when the judging is trying to be done, it can confuse the athletes that are on stage. And again, as you said, the judge knows what's happening on the judging table and knows when they want to move people, when they want to call the next turn, based on if they're finished judging or not. I actually think IC and Vic do it really, really well. So Tony Lanciano, he basically, he's the MC, he calls them out, and then he hands it over to the judges. And then when they're done, they let him know, and then he starts talking again. So he might just maybe every now and then encourage people to cheer people on or something like that, but that's as far as it goes. I think he does a really good job at bouncing between those two responsibilities on the day. And communicating with the crowd as well, because that's obviously something that
the judge on the panel is not going to do. And as you said, Tony's the perfect example. Obviously, he's been doing it for a long time, so he's very, very good at what he does. But their system is very bulletproof in that, like you said, he does the intro and then over to you, whoever it is that's going to be judging. And then they'll literally say, "Thank you, Tony, we've made our decision." And then it's back on him and he's hyping the crowd. And, I think we're probably, that's what we're accustomed to because we've had that, in Victoria since forever. So I think that's kind of like the blueprint for how it should be done.
Yeah. And I think also having that separation where the MC is in one area and the judges are in another area and they don't interact with each other in any way.
And that's a perfect example. Like, I don't think in all my years of going to those shows, I don't think I've ever seen Tony anywhere near the judges' table, ever.
Ever. Never.
No.
No.
So, yeah, it's good.
All right, next one. Can you talk about competitors taking up unhealthy, addictive behaviors in prep? Example, having packets of chewing gum, eating liters of diet right cordial, vaping when they've never vaped before, taking too much pre-workout, etc. MG, have you ever seen any of this kind of happen, and do you pull it up, or do you have any recommendations of what is acceptable and unacceptable?
Yeah, man. Look, some of those are fairly common. I don't know that over-consuming or having more chewing gum than normal, or maybe a little bit of extra diet cordial, is as concerning as it sounds. I mean, I certainly haven't had an athlete start vaping during prep just to cure hunger, but I have heard of athletes that are doing it, and that's concerning. Like, if you're taking up, something that's very detrimental to your health to try and curb hunger, maybe you need to ask yourself, am I as committed as I think I am? Because if you need to take up something that's that evil to be able to sustain your journey, maybe your why isn't good enough, in my opinion. So something like that I would pull up. But unless it was, causing my athlete some adverse health effects by over-consuming gum or cordial to the point that their, digestive system started to become disrupted, or they were sick regularly, or there was, a trade-off that was not worth them being able to curb their hunger, I don't think it's that big of a concern. Typically, over-consuming of things like that at this, in the middle of prep or towards the back end of prep can then lead to the similar types of behaviors post-comp. So that would be something that I'd be keeping an eye out and having regular discussions on, because you don't want, what starts as a chewing gum an addiction, let's call it, to then lead into some binge eating episodes or things like that. So there are certainly signs to keep an eye out for. Again, that just comes down to really good communication between athlete and coach, but there's levels to it. I think chewing gum is one thing. I think vaping is very, very different. Mm-hmm. And I think that if I had an athlete who started vaping to curb hunger, that would be a very big concern for me. And there probably needs to be a discussion around, is this really something that you want to proceed with?
What do you think, Scotty?
Yeah, I agree. I think chewing gum is one of those things where I've equally had someone a couple of weeks ago, bring to fruition, "Oh, I've been having chewy. Does that really matter? Or how much chewy have you been having?" And going through 2 or 3 packs, I'm like, yeah, that fucking matters, because, this guy's having, over 100 calories worth of that. And then you're factoring in, I'm also having, lots of these sugar-free Sprite or whatever drinks they were. Like, you're having one. I'm literally having 1 or 2 with every meal. And I'm like, well, that's a fucking problem, because this is where, as MG just said, your why needs to supersede you trying to find a distraction, because that's all it is. You're trying to replace your inability to consume food that you want to consume. So you're replicating it with a sugar-free beverage, which is not sustainable. And at some point, they're just like cracks in the boat, and it's only a matter of time before it sinks. And so these cracks make a difference. And so rather than focusing on ways to distract you from that, you just need to be better disciplined in terms of, what I want to do is more important to me than having 3 packets of chewing gum or having copious amounts of soft drink. And I'm not saying you can't have chewing gum, for sure, but you might have one after each meal. Do you track it? Yeah, I request my athletes to track if they're going to have gum, because it still has calories in it. Same with sugar-free cordial. I don't really work out how much I'm having. I just it's sugar-free. Okay, cool. But there could be like 12, 14 calories per serve. If you're having 10, 15 glasses of that a day, and people might think I'm being extreme here, it's actually quite common that people will do that. So I think rather than doing that and then relying on large amounts of sugar-free, caffeinated beverages, it just comes down to, if you're finding it that challenging, and if you don't, and equally if you're a long way out from that, you really need to have a really big, hard think if this is something that you want to, do, because it's going to get harder. And history tells us, and equally, anecdotally, I have found that most athletes that are trying to make their food super, super sweet and highly palatable tend to have, a greater risk of hedonic eating and, again, leaning into that branch of I can never be full. I need to make my food as big as possible, as opposed to, I get a lot of stick when I compete around, you only eat the same things, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, it gives your data more correlative power to any kind of change. But more importantly, don't have any focus towards anything else because, my meal two is my meal two. It never changes, it's just less. And equally, most athletes that report, not having those same issues within their contest prep are usually the ones that pretty much eat the same thing in the improvement season as well, because they look at the food that they're eating as a substrate as opposed to I'm hungry. I use the example, it's like you're going to the swimming pool and you jump in the pool and you're complaining that you got wet. Like that's literally what you're doing. You've agreed and you've signed up to a prolonged period of energy deprivation. If you're not tired and you're not hungry and you're not a little bit cranky sometimes, then you're probably not getting to where you need to get to. And is it sustainable? No, but we've gone over this time and time again. It doesn't need to be. So I know I've probably gone on and off on different tangents there, but I think as long as, again, context is employed and you're not over consuming, I think that as MG summed it up, your why must supersede some of these acute, perturbations that you are going to encounter within the contest prep state.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of good points there. I'll try to reiterate my thoughts, which are very, very similar to yours. So first thing, I'd like to look at the foundation of everything they're doing to see, are they doing anything there that could be contributing to their hunger, that you could make their hunger lesser? So let's do all that first. And some of that is the fact that they're still eating highly palatable foods and trying to keep that in their diet. So I'd be doing all those foundational things first. And then, yes, maybe they need to sprinkle in some of these. Maybe it's a Pepsi Max every now and then, or it's some chewing gum every now and then, or I wouldn't say vaping, but maybe it's some things that they need to do to help along the way, but it should only be a small component. And I would check in with your coach to see what is a reasonable and responsible amount that you can have of these things. And I would definitely be recommending to track them all for sure. And then assess whether they are affecting you physically on how you look, because we can get issues with digestion, bloating, fluid retention. And if they are, that's when we pull back. So you covered a lot of good points. And in a sense of what I'm worried about is what you said is you start to include them to overcome a craving that then can snowball, and you just keep leveling up and you level up to the next level. And before you know it, it gets too far away from you and you're down a hole that you can't get out of. And the boat sinks, as you said. So I'd use them sparingly, but they are okay to use, but just be responsible with them and make sure that your foundation is set really, really solid first. Did you do any of those, Scotty or MG, in your prep? I know for me, I would have like a Coke Zero with my dinner every day, and I would utilize coffee or decaf coffee. That's pretty much about it. I didn't do any of the diet right stuff or any of the chewing gum stuff or anything like that. Did you do any of that stuff, Scotty?
Coke Zero, I would have one every single night. That was sort of like my treat to look forward to. There were maybe some days, if they were like on day 4 or 5 of a dig, where there might have been a day where I might have had 2 Coke Zeros. But aside from that, everything else was the same. Sometimes sugar-free, cordial, as in the diet right, but equally I drink that of an evening in the off season as well. So that wasn't really anything that was new. But again, you're talking about 1 glass and it's still weighed. But chewing gum, not so much. I tend to steer away from sugar alcohols just because of the effect that they have. And I find that even if I only have a little bit of that, it tends to leave me just feeling a little bit distended. And because obviously sugar alcohols are not digested usually, and they tend to ferment. But yeah, I think just keeping things as basic as possible. And equally, we've been doing this for a long time, and I use the analogy that success leaves clues. And I think if you look at all of the top level athletes, there's a common trait that they don't lean into that element of hunger and poor me and what can I replace, being able to eat more food with. It literally will be something as basic as I'm really looking forward to having my Coke Zero, and that is your treat that you look forward to. And yeah, that resembles an increase in food focus, but when you're having 6 or 7 of those a day, it's a different story. And equally, consuming lots of sugar, alcohols is also problematic. So that's why I think it's better to just keep it simplistic. And maybe that's one of the things that you put in your contract. And this is what we talk about at the start of prep, some of your non-negotiables. So I'm going to do this, this, and this, and I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z. So even when I'm tired and hungry, I'm not going to include sugar-free jelly and having 2 or 3 servings of that, because lots of people do that. And they use that as a hunger management tool. But then they're typically having it in an evening, and jelly contains a lot of water. And so you go to bed, yeah, you might feel full, but you're waking up 4 or 5 times a night to go to the bathroom. And so that disrupts your sleep, which also disrupts your body's ability to induce and maximize lipolysis. So you miss out on oxidizing as much fat as you can. So it's a catch-22. I think at some point you just have to accept that you're going to get wet. And I'm referring to the swimming analogy there.
MG, quickly, do you utilize any of those in comp prep?
No, certainly not anymore. I don't know if you remember this, MT. Maybe it was like 10 years ago. I did a comp, and then I came out of comp, and then I started to explore high volume / replacement style eating, where I was like, oh, here's a pizza, I'm going to make it a different way. And I was using a shitload of sugar-free stuff, zucchini, cauliflower to bulk up. Yeah, this is a long time ago, and I was getting these monster meals, and it was just the worst thing I could have done. I didn't last long, but let me tell you, I was sick on the toilet all the time, never ever full, and making bowls that the size of 5 of your salad bowls, man, just to get full, right? And of course, what was the lead off of having all that fiber and all those sugar alcohols? Of course, yeah, it was not good. So I learned very early on what not to do, and since then, man, I've never gone down that path. No chewies, maybe a Coke Zero a day in prep as a little treat as well, but I'm fine, man. I rather my mindset now is I rather eat something that I'm already eating, but have more of it if I was ever going to have something, than have something really shit for a low amount of calories. It gives me no fucking satisfaction. I'd rather just have nothing. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things, in the back end of prep for me is when I finish my last meal and I'm dieted down and I know I'm still hungry, is to be like, this last meal finished. I know I'm going to be hungry in 10 minutes, and I know that's going to help me get shredded. So the sooner I feel hungry after my last meal, my brain makes this correlation of success. And that's what I do, man. And that's what I teach all my athletes is if you're hungry and you're inside out and you're hungry, it's probably because you're getting closer and closer to where you want to be. So embrace it. Take hunger as a positive thing. It's what I always teach. Take hunger as a positive thing. And I promise you're going to go so much further in your prep. As soon as you feel like it's negative, it's going to feel negative. As soon as you tell yourself it's for the greater good and you're progressing closer to your goal, you start to view hunger as a good thing.
Yeah. You almost get a little bit sadistic when you're hunger.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
And I was talking to someone this morning, what's your favorite thing? I'm like, I love being in the back end of prep and going to a family function, and I love everyone questioning me. And, I love how I can be like, no, don't need it, don't want it. I'll go into the bathroom, I'll do a cheeky little ab check in my auntie's mirror, and then I'll walk back out and be like, hey, bitches.
Oh, love it. All right, let's move on. Training question: drop sets versus training to failure while in prep. Are drop sets really worth it? I see them as the same thing, because for a drop set, you're still training to failure. That's how I treat them. Maybe you could say a drop set adds a bit more volume because you're technically extending the set a little bit further because you're dropping the weight and keeping going. But I still think it's training to failure. But in prep, Scotty, training to failure, is it worth it?
Yeah, well, like what you just said, I think it depends on which lens you're looking at it through, because in a lot of ways, a drop set, as you said, you're inducing failure, but you're more or less just accumulating more volume. And so, we know from a hypertrophy adaptation perspective that mechanical tension is more or less the primary driver behind, maximizing that. And so in prep, you need to be realistic. Unless you're in that initial phase where you've got a lot of fat mass that you can potentially use to still accrue new contractile tissue. For the most part, you're looking at retention, not accrual. And so you're looking at preserving tissue. And I think you want to accumulate enough volume at enough intensity to still let your body know that you need that tissue, while still managing, systemic and peripheral fatigue, because essentially you're managing the stimulus to fatigue ratio. So there's definitely a place for it, but are you going to do hack squats as your second exercise to absolute failure, and then you're absolutely ruined, and the next 90 minutes of your workout is a complete misery? Probably not. But are you going to take maybe your back offset to close proximity? And we know there's a lot of good research now that supports it. You don't necessarily have to go all the way, as long as you're within that zone. Speak about that cellular signaling response being heightened like a dimming switch. So as long as you're turning those lights up, reasonably bright, you're going to be able to hold on to a majority of that tissue. So I don't think it's necessary, but equally, there's also a lot of good research now supporting that you can get the same amount of gain, so to speak, in a shorter amount of time. That whole agonist-antagonist superset paper that came out comparing the two, so that if you're time poor and you don't have the ability to liberate 90 minutes to training, if you need to be able to get in, get out, then you're going to be able to do that. You may not potentially move as much load as you would be able to if you were to take the right amount of RI, but equally, if you're looking at retention, you're talking about a really, minute difference in terms of it being inferior or superior. So I think it just comes down to whatever is best suited to you, but there's definitely times for it. Like the back end of the workout, you might want to, get an idea of where the physique's at when you're lean, and we use a technique like occlusion training or blood flow restriction. And so you might produce a large amount of volume. You might have someone that's got tendon issues, and so you could use a methodology like that to more or less train to failure without accruing the same amount of systemic fatigue. So there's lots of different ways that you can manipulate it, but is it essential to do one or the other? I don't think so, no.
You would say, though, it's important to train with intensity still while you're in prep, because for that retention of the muscle mass. Yeah,
absolutely. As I say, intensity retains density. So it is one of those things where you need to give your body a reason in terms of why it needs to hold on to that tissue. So, and this is where I think at the back end, people are like, I'm just going to drop the load. And history tells us and research tells us that most people, in terms of where their proximity to failure lies, they're usually going to be anywhere from 5 to 7 reps shy in terms of where they physically could go. So it's probably only that top bracket of athletes that probably have a real understanding of where that is. And as long as you're within that sort of 2 to 3 rep range of that honest failure, I think you're going to be okay. But you definitely still need to put intensity through the system. But again, it's managing it so that you're getting the right amount without obviously stepping over the line and then compromising or accumulating too much fatigue.
Yeah. And also the art of coaching comes into play here, because I know some athletes that like to chase numbers, and in prep, because their strength starts to diminish a little bit, I will give them intensity techniques like drop sets or supersets and things like that, so they start to enjoy the fact that they can train hard and they can push themselves and not worry about numbers per se. And I have some that can't handle the intensity techniques because their fatigue is too high. So I'd take them out and just give them straight sets and reps. So I think there's no, as you said, context. There's no right or wrong. You just have to be able to manage their fatigue and make sure they train with intensity.
Yeah. And everyone's going to be different as well with their nutrition intervention. You may have someone that's able to eat a lot more, is fortunate enough metabolically, they're pushing in more food. So as a result of that, they can recover better. But if you've got someone that's eating, less than 100 grams of carbs, and you're asking them to do an abundance of drop sets and supersets, the likelihood is the quality is not going to be, very, very high, in which case you're better off probably giving them less and then, leaning into the quality side of things. But yeah, I don't think there's a blanket statement for, it's this way or it's that way. It's just, building in, there should be intensifiers definitely in there to an extent, but obviously it's about managing that. And equally, that's the advantage of working with a coach in the improvement season, because you can collate that data in terms of what this person can tolerate. And once they've been through a prep, you usually know as well, there's going to come a point where, usually things are pretty smooth, and then they start to get into really, really lean territory. And then you have to reduce. Well, I usually will reduce volume. We'll still keep intensity high, but we'll take it away and place more emphasis on the quality of what you're doing. But again, it's going to be bespoke to the individual.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, MG? Actually, and also you brought up a really good point, Scotty, about sometimes you reduce volume, but make sure the quality's there. Whereas some coaches might think the opposite and be like, oh, for them to get leaner, I need to give them more in the gym, which can be counterintuitive. But MG, you have anything you want to chat about that?
No, I was just about to touch on that. You're right. I've seen a lot of times that, people's, and you've heard me say this on the pod before, people's only methodology is more. and then they wonder why they run out of rope and why they're not getting responses from the body and why all of a sudden the athlete's starting to break down and the injuries tend to rise because it's not always the right way. But one of the things I wanted to say, which touches on your point, I'm saying doing a lot of face-to-face still, I see this in person, right? I actually see that for some athletes, I had someone this morning who I can push their straight set to, really close proximity to failure, and I know it's genuine. And if I was to give them a drop set, it tends to just be horseshit. The quality's not there, the range goes, the ability to push past that point isn't great. So for that athlete, I just don't do it anymore because I just don't get the same response versus having some other athletes that I get to see and coach in person who will push that first effort reasonably hard, but for some reason, you give them a 10-second break and make them go again to failure. That second one tends to always be so much closer to what I would consider genuine failure, and they always get up having felt like they've given a better effort. They get a better mind-muscle connection. They feel like the pump is better too. So it is, I think it's very individualized athlete to athlete, and the only way that you get a really good grip is face-to-face is great, but if you're an online coach, you ask athletes for videos and actually be able to review their sets and performance in something like a check-in, which I know you guys do regularly too.
Yep. All right, let's move on to the next one. Completely different. I've always wondered, is there a significant tan mess left at the venues after the show? So if anyone's seen us and stayed to the end of a show, you probably see us with baby wipes and wiping down walls and doors and handles because people are touching everything. Like, we get it. You've got tan all over you, accidentally lean on a wall, or you're touching a wall because you're doing a pump up and you need to hold on to something. But we always do ask people to be really, really mindful. But we understand that sometimes tan gets on walls and on floors, and we just have to go around and wipe them. What I would say is, and we've seen it at a couple of shows, is maybe using like a gloss product and it getting on the floor and becoming super slippery. So we always be mindful of that. Yeah.
I think for the most part, the tan that's left over is probably not as bad as people think, but there's always leftover marks, a lot of handprints. And of course, just think about if you're a bikini athlete doing a glute kickback like we spoke about just earlier in this episode, and you need something to lean onto, you kind of don't have a choice but to grab onto a wall if you don't have a coach. And, it's human nature to just, not be fully aware of your surroundings sometimes and, pop a glute on a wall to lean on it or an elbow. It happens, but we always go around and clean it because we don't want, poor relationships with the venue, especially if we want to continue to host our event there. So we are very mindful of it. But you would see all sorts of stuff at different feds with different venues, glad wrap on toilet seats, painting, tape and masks on walls, all sorts of stuff to try and prevent it. But for the most part, people are pretty good.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Still haven't got my period back after season A. Should I get tests done? What do you think, MG? Should they get it checked out? It's season A has probably been, what has it been now? It's probably 12 weeks ago, 3 months ago.
Yeah. Look, I think if you look at history, 12 weeks post-show isn't a long time. There's probably some people who feel like it is, but it's not. I've given examples of, males and females, not recovering for 16 plus weeks post-show at a bare minimum. And I think if you look at some of my female competitors, and I do coach a lot of bikini athletes, not getting it back 12 weeks post-show is probably more common than those getting it back within that 12-week period. There is no set formula or set speed that each individual does get it back. I've seen it stretch past 12 months, and I've had athletes who get it back within 6 weeks post-show. So unless there's anything else going on that is outside of the norm in terms of symptoms, you probably don't need to get tested at this point in time. I'd certainly be having a look at how far you've come post-show, how much weight you've put on, what are the rest of your biomarkers like? Are you sleeping well? Are you performing well? Is your energy good? Is your recovery good? If all of those are, improving and have just been getting better week on week or month on month since the show, it's probably just a matter of time. But I wouldn't be super stressed at the 12-week mark. Likely that it'll sort itself out. But if it doesn't change, you can definitely go and get some tests done. It's certainly not going to hurt to have tests, but also it may just be a matter of time, and you may be getting tests for no reason.
Yeah, I think making sure that you're fully recovered from all aspects and sitting there for a while. So do that, and then if still nothing changes and you haven't got it back, then potentially you can get a test done. It's no harm, and it's only going to give you more information. I even say if you want to get a test done straight post-comp, just to see what all the markers are like, it's always good data to have. And then it maybe can help you with, supplement, vitamin, mineral, herb interventions. But you're most likely going to see that post-comp, all the common markers are going to be pretty low, and there's not much you're going to really be able to do about it other than just fully recover. Sure, you can, the typical things I see is like, iron's going to be low, vitamin B12 is going to be low, all those things are going to be low. So, having those kind of supplements and adding those in is always going to help, but sometimes just going to take a little bit of time. What do you think, Scotty?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the menstrual cycle, it's just different from female to female. There's some females that will get it back, really, really quickly. And again, I've spent the best part of 18 months, going inside out in terms of all of the bits and pieces and the moving parts to do with the menstrual cycle in my research. And I think if we're talking about in context to physique athletes, those that get very, very lean are going to see a change in sex hormone production. So we know that estradiol levels are going to be quite low. Equally, as you said, getting a blood panel done post-prep gives you an idea of just how low they are. And I think it really just depends on certain circumstances, and equally how quickly you exit the dieting condition and the level that you get back to in terms of everyone's body fat set point is going to be different. There are some women that can hang around at maybe 15% body composition and still have a normal eumenorrheic menstrual cycle. They'll have a regular bleed, they don't have any issues. And then there's some who might exit prep and they need to get back to 25%. And we don't have lots and lots of research in this space. I know that I always just come back to that Halliday paper where there was that figure girl and it took her a little over 13 months to get back to where she was for her cycle to return. And equally, I've had a female that it's taken us over a year to get her cycle back. But equally, not as surprising that it was the year in COVID where both she and I dieted for well and truly over 40 weeks because the shows kept getting pushed back. And so she stayed in that condition of being extremely lean for an extended period of time. So if you were to average it out in terms of how long she was actually at that level of inside out conditioned, it probably wasn't that different to had she have only been in that state for 8 weeks instead of say 18 to 20 weeks because the shows kept getting rolled back. But for the most part, I would say a range of anywhere from 8 to 24 weeks is everyone's going to be different. But sometimes, again, there's outliers to that, and there will be some females that it takes a little bit longer. And I think as long as energy availability is where it should be, and you're looking at that in terms of how many calories are you consuming per kilogram of lean mass after expenditure has been accounted for, because we know that low or subclinical low energy availability is going to be anywhere from that 30 kcal and under. So ideally, you may just need to be a little bit softer and a little bit more well-fed for an extended period of time. But it's very rare that it would exceed probably that 9-month case scenario. And if you were still having issues then, go and see an endocrinologist and maybe take a little bit more of a deeper dive. But usually, as long as you're being consistent and you're giving your body that sign that, energy availability is no longer compromised, I'm in a well-fed state, it's safe to return to baseline, your body will usually, will correct things on its own.
Awesome. All right, let's move on to the next one. This one's about you, Scotty. Natty Pro cards or Beatin enhanced guys, which one outweighs the other? So getting your Natty Pro cards or Beatin enhanced guys?
To be honest, probably the IFBB show was bigger. But equally, I think because I honestly had no expectations on that, and I knew how big the show was and how many athletes. So I think that was a pretty cool moment. And I think, funnily enough, the backstage when people thought I was just being shy around my pharmacology use in terms of what I was using, because everyone's quite open about that, like, what did you use, what diuretics, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I'm natural. And they're like, come on, man, like, no one really cares. And I'm like, no, seriously, like, I compete as a natural. And so, yeah, I would say probably that. Not that I don't take, I'm still grateful for the experiences I've had in the natural feds, but yeah, I think the enhanced show was probably at the top.
So are they openly talking backstage about what they take?
Yeah, well, more so the day of the tan. So when we got tanned, it was done at a world gym, and there was like no set times in terms of it was organized. You were just told if you're in, once you've had your weight and height taken, you go out the back and then you basically stand in line. And we're in line for, no joke, like 3.5, 4 hours. So the person in front of you, the people behind you, you're talking to them. And it just so happened that two of the guys that I was in line with, one of them I actually competed against and he actually placed in the top 3 as well. He placed 3rd, and so he was talking to me about that. And there was a classic guy and a bodybuilder behind who were doing the same thing. And so they were talking about some of their peak week interventions, and there was a big part of it that was like, "What are you doing, man?" But equally, I'm just like, "Oh, okay, fair enough." Like I wasn't, engaging in conversation with the coaching hat on or with my sports science hat on. It was more just like listening, observing. This is all new. Again, everyone was really friendly and nice. And then, asking, "Well, what's your week like? What's your coach been doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I just look after my own prep." And they're like, "What have you been running? What's your cycle been like?" And then, it probably took 15 minutes. And then it was just Jen also, because she was in line with me, reinforcing that, no, he's naturally doesn't take steroids. And that was what I was doing. And equally, there's no like begrudgment, and I have the utmost respect for the guys that play on that side of the fence, and equally seeing them in the flesh, just how big some of those guys are. It's ridiculous. But yeah, very, very cool experience.
That's awesome. The next one we got was, does Scotty coach MG and MT with training and nutrition, and who coaches Scotty? So yeah, Scotty does coach both of us. And who coaches you?
Me.
Yeah, Scotty.
Myself and I. Yeah, Scotty. Yeah, no, I look after mine. I'm pretty particular and OCD with everything in terms of how I employ, but equally, I'm fortunate enough that I have good people around me whose opinions, I value. Like I remember vividly, I think it was like maybe 8 weeks out, we were in a posing room up in Queensland, MT, and I hadn't really, shown my physique really to anyone. And I was doing some posing with you guys, and equally, would get your take on it. And Jen is obviously a very, good sounding board for me as well, because having seen me compete so many times, she knows roughly how I need to look and where I need to be at. But equally, I've been doing this long enough. I have a pretty good idea of where I'm at. And I think I have a reasonably okay job being subjective in terms of what I need to do. And I can remove that from that. So yeah.
This is not linked, but question was, how do you go about coaching someone you don't like? Do you like us, Scotty?
Oh, I thought you were saying as in, if I don't like myself, do I like you guys? Of course, I love you boys.
Hey, it's like Scotty doesn't like us, but doesn't know how to tell us. So he asked this question on the pod here so that we can answer it for him.
Is this an actual question?
It is. It is a question.
How do you go about coaching someone that you don't like?
Yeah,
it's a tough one. I mean, you just cut cords. Like if you don't like them, I suppose it depends where you are in your coaching journey. Are you someone who's trying to build their book and needs more clients? So, it'll teach you a lot and help you to develop, to work with someone that you potentially don't have aligned values, or you don't like the way that they conduct themselves. Maybe their integrity is not there. Certainly I'd be having a conversation with that athlete if you feel like it's going to be a problem now. I'd love to address it in the early days, because you're only really setting both of you up for failure. I think, ultimately, if you've done that and it's still not working, you don't coach that person. Simple as that. You tell them that I think that you'll both be better off, parting ways, and sometimes that just happens.
It also depends on whether you start to not like them after you've already started coaching them and you've got to know them and you don't vibe with them. But I think that if you're just not vibing in general, that's going to be a big component of the coaching relationship too, because as you know, coaching is not just sending a plan and hoping they follow it. It's having a relationship with someone. So normally the people that you don't like, you don't have a good relationship with. So it's going to be very, very difficult to coach someone that you don't like. It depends what you don't like about them too. What if it's just because they like something that you don't like, and have different political objections that you don't have? Or like, what is it? Is it really that serious, and is it just something that's not really super important, or is it something that really goes against your personality and your characteristics and what you want to see in people? So it's a bit difficult. But anything on that, Scotty?
I think you can work with someone that you may not perhaps want to socialize with outside of business hours, as long as there's an element of respect. Like, respect's a really big one for me, and I always go by, I'm like, if I'm asking for it from you, then you'll get it from me. But equally, I think as soon as that line or that element of respect is gone, I know at least for me, I wouldn't be able to continue to have a working relationship with that person. Fortunate enough, I don't ever really have to deal with that. But I think as well, the importance of having a consult call, and that's something that I'm big on. When you get a client inquiry and someone that maybe wants to work with you, rather than saying, yeah, no dramas, this is what I do and these are my fees, let's get it started. I'll always have an initial consult, more so that I can get, an idea over that 20, 30 minutes of what they're like as a person, asking them some questions that gives me good intel in terms of, is this someone that is going to align with the way that I coach and with the systems that I implement? And equally, am I going to be a good fit for that person as well? And so if they're after someone that's a bit more relaxed, who, doesn't really mind if they're going to go out and do this and they're going to do that, then, are they better off with someone who's maybe a little bit more relaxed versus someone who's very meticulous with attention to detail and following more of a methodical approach? So I think if you've done that screening process right, you usually don't have to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Next one, again, for you, Scotty. This person.
Lots of questions today.
This person, because you weren't here last week, so now I have to leave more for you, mate. This person starts off their question with telling us they absolutely love the potty and I love us, which thank you very much. But it's a question for Scotty. Does he only coach males, or do you have a preference in coaching males only? And do you guys coach, I think it's all of us, figure athletes? Because we don't talk about it too much. So Scotty, do you only coach males? What do you prefer?
No, I feel like there's almost a bit of a stigma that I don't coach females. I do, and I love working. I don't have a preference to only work with guys. I do have a large quantity of males on my roster. I'd say it's probably 60, maybe 65, 70% male, 30% female. And most of the females tend to be either fitness or figure. But equally, I actually don't have any wellness athletes on my roster. And that's I feel like as a category, it's definitely one that's evolving, and it's definitely, an athlete that if the opportunity arises in the near future, I'd absolutely love to jump on board and work with. But I definitely don't just work with males. I work with males and females. I'm fortunate enough to work with some really, really high-end female athletes. But I guess because of the nature of some of these athletes I work with, they're not usually year in, year out. So I've got a few girls that will be on stage end of next year, one early next year, and then a lot of them are 26, 27. So yeah, I do work with them. And equally, we all, I assume, work with figure. I've got a few figure girls on my roster. I know you do, MT, and MG, I think you do as well. So, and I'm probably speaking on behalf of you guys, but yeah, I think there's no real limits. The only one who doesn't really work with, I think, males is probably just UMT, and that's probably just the way that it's just panned out for you.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I think as it just grew and more females came on board, I just decided to keep that as my niche. And
a niche within a niche.
A niche within a niche, yeah. Definitely. All right, let's end on this last one here. Mindset, if you're still prepping for a show in 2026 and you're just starting your coaching now. So, you've got a coach, you're just starting now this year, but your show's not for 2 years' time. How do you stay locked in within your mindset? Maybe, Scotty, you want to talk about it, because I know you have some people that, as you said, are in a couple of years' time that you're coaching right now.
I think compartmentalizing it, like from a periodization perspective, like 2 years' time for me is not 2 years' time, because I'm thinking about if it's 2 years' time, by the time you factor in a pre-prep phase, there's maybe 1 or 2 tidy up phases in that improvement season. You might only be looking at like 46 to 50 weeks of actually, being in a controlled surplus to improve, which is not a lot of time. And in this day and age, the standard is getting better and better every season. So you can't afford to sleep. And so my advice to anyone that is thinking about getting on stage, you can't afford to waste a single day. The goal should be to just be a fraction better every single day you wake up, from the way that you prepare, the way that you train, the way that you recover, because it really is just those daily efforts compounding over time. And that's the difference, because you see a lot of these younger athletes now, they step on stage and they look like they've been bodybuilding for 10, 12 years, that the maturity of muscle they have. But equally, a lot of them have just had really, really good coaching, perhaps at a young age. Maybe from 18, they were getting it right, and they step on stage for the first time at 22 or 23. And it's just that, not phased about having to be lean all the time, willing to just pay the rent week in, week out, be in a controlled surplus, be a little bit uncomfortable, lift heavy, progress over time. And then their contest prep comes around, and they just absolutely tear it to pieces. So yeah, I think if you compartmentalize it and you break it down, 2 years can go very, very quickly. We were even doing that like with your show, MT, in terms of 2026. Like you're doing mid-year 2026, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at the time that you have in a surplus, it doesn't seem like it's an eternity, does it?
No, for me, the biggest thing is I wish I had more time. Like,
Yeah.
because I know how long it takes to grow and to improve. And when you start, chunking out the phases and be like, okay, this is how much months I've got to build. This is how much. I'm like, wow, I wish I had more time to build because it takes so long. So for me, it's actually super motivating to really try hard every single day, because those months are going to start to accumulate. And before I know it, I'll have to go into a fat loss phase. So I think what you said is right. You have to, break it down to phases and realize that you don't have as much time as what you think. How about you, MG?
Yeah, man. And well done on, starting with a coach 2 years out. A lot of people don't. And I would say for the most part, you're already ahead of the 8 ball. A lot of people just start when they think they want to start prep, and, they don't have the right foundation. So you're putting yourself in the best possible position, but, the weeks do fly by. So your opportunity is to leave no stone unturned for as long and consistently as you possibly can. But I just think this person's already so far ahead of so many other competitors.
And just a quick one to that. If you ever are feeling like perhaps you're finding it a bit harder or motivation levels are starting to dip, going to a show is a really nice refresher to ignite the fire, to be like, wow, that's where the standard's at now. And you'll leave and you're probably going to want to go straight to the gym from the show. So I think that's a nice, easy cheat code as well to break it up, to be able to have a look specifically at your division and be like, wow, that's where I need to be at. And obviously to get back in the trenches and get to work.
Awesome. All right. I think that's a good place to end it. Good to have you back, Scotty, answering a bunch of questions.
Right, to be back. You and me are on tour this weekend, MT.
I know. We've got Sydney on Saturday and then Adelaide on Sunday for some NBA workshops. So we haven't got to travel together since Bali in March.
I know. The question is, are we going to go and get a little reflexology afterwards?
I know. We've got to figure something out, because we've got back-to-back traveling Saturday and Sunday. So it'll be good. It'd definitely be good to travel and see you and debrief and spend some time together for sure. And obviously see some amazing athletes too.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening and all your questions, and enjoy the rest of your week.
See you next week.
You boys.